People come to me all the time with their flat art asking how they can create depth. In this thorough walkthrough, Kevin Murphy shares his simple but powerful approach to creating depth in any artwork. In Evolve, we have these live classes every week as a supplement to the videos, assignments, feedback, materials, everything that makes up the Evolve program, where students can ask questions, listen in on specific topics, freely converse with our instructors, and I'm so delighted that this live class was aired publicly for everyone to see because it fits in so well with everything that I've been talking about in the fundamental series, except that it's much more thorough than anything I've done so far. Now, Kevin is the founder of Evolve Artist, and he's joined by Piper Talladay, our head instructor for the Evolve students, and he is going to create depth in this image here using Photoshop so that we can isolate the effect of each change we make using the fundamentals. So let's get right into it.
Hi guys, we are here. It's Piper, and I'm the head instructor of Evolve Artist, and I'm joined today by Evolve founder Kevin Murphy, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the three moving parts of painting to increase depth in your artwork. Kevin, how's it going?
It's going fine. It's going fine. I didn't do my homework, so we'll be kind of doing this on the fly here, but that's normal around here.
Yes,
I got some work done. So.
You got some work done. So we're off to a good start. We have some stuff. But do you want to give us a little preview about what you're talking about?
Sure. So, with Evolve, we always talk about value, color, and edge. We drive that point. There's nothing else. No such thing as a portrait. There's no such thing as landscapes, or there's just values, colors, and edges, and how you manage them. And it seems like how could something really complex be made up of just values, colors, and edges? I can see robots, and I can see space, and I can see all of these things. And how do we ignore those ideas to just apply value, color, and edge to something? And so what I'm going to do today is I have an image that was put together for one of the students at the school here in New Jersey. And so I'm going to show you how we build depth into a painting using all three of those tools, one at a time, to show you how each tool affects depth. And then what we're going to do is we're going to layer them. And so you'll see like using value, you'll see a little bit of a shift in the depth. Then when we do it with edges, you'll see like even more, and then we'll adjust the color. And so you'll be able to see how all three of those things contribute individually and then together. And you'll see that the effect when you put them together magnifies. And you'll see like in this one, not every image is going to be the same, but this is a very important thing. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach. The way this works is very simple. Imagine if you had a toggle for value, another one for color, and another one for edge. And so maybe when we're working, the particular painting, value doesn't do very much. It does something, but it doesn't do a lot. But color can be used to dramatically alter the painting. So color is where you work. You use a little bit of value, but color is where you're going to put your attention, or maybe edge. So, but the idea is that we're not going to just take all three of them and push them all the way off to one side, because it has to be balanced. It's never going to be just like everything goes all the way that direction and that'll work. We have to nuance what we're doing, and that comes with experience. Once you understand how this works, you can start applying it in very simple ways, one tool at a time. So maybe you do a painting and you only use edge to create depth. Get comfortable with it. And I don't mean an extravagant painting, I mean simple things. If you can't create depth with a ball and a can and a cube, you can't create depth. There's no reason to go in and do a portrait of 35 people or a painting of a battlefield and try to create depth in it if you are not already well-versed. So you can do a painting and use edge and get settled in and see how it works. Make sense of it. Own it. Then use value and see if you can bend the curve a little bit with value. And then try it with color. Once you understand how all three of them work individually, then start putting them together. Maybe not all three, but two of them. Maybe just value and edge in one painting, or color and edge, or value and color. You start mixing them until you get comfortable. And it'll start changing the way you think, and that's going to show itself in your paintings when you work.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're going to get started. And before we really deep dive into this, I just want to say hi to everybody. We have a bunch of Evolve students who are joining us, but we are broadcasting this from our public page. So we're really excited to see some people out there who maybe haven't heard Kevin talk before. And we have a lot of students who I see in the comments right now. So we're glad you guys are here, and let's dig into this.
Okay, so I think I'm going to be off screen for most of this. So here's the image we're going to be working with. And like I said, this is a painting that a student at the Art Academy in Hillsborough put together. He's a full-time student. So here we have a scene on, let's say, Mars. We've got a couple of soldiers. And I've moved it to grayscale so that you can see just values and edges, right? Because when we work in Evolve, that's what we do. We start in grayscale, values and edges. We're going to start there. And I'm going to begin by using edges, right? Edges are the easiest one to manipulate depth. So I want you to see, like, the edges back in here, all of these lines, they're all very sharp. This edge here on the mountain is just as sharp as the sharp edges in here. These edges on the mountain are just about as sharp as the ones, we get some really strong highlights. But if you look at these edges and kind of like back in here, you'll see these edges are just as sharp as the edges on here. Again, we have a nice sharp edge here. This back in here is nice and sharp. Again, if you look here, back in here, and against this, it's all the same sharpness. Everything, everywhere. Even this guy, this mountain, this edge, they're equally sharp. And so in order to create the impression of depth, what we need to do is make things that are further away softer focus and make things that are closer sharper. So, let me actually, before I do that, so I have a finished version of this with just edges. So if we take this, I just want you to take a look at this, how these sharp edges, everything kind of flattens out. And even though we've got these big value jumps, the value jumps are actually already helping to create some depth. But this edge and this edge are similar. This gun just spills down into this, and the edges are all equal. So everything kind of sits close. If I make this softer focus than this, which is a softer focus than this here, which is a softer focus than the guy up front, we're going to create a lot more depth in the painting. Now, when you look at this, you can see the guy up front is clearly in front of everything. In fact, if you look here, his gun, even though it's the same value range, actually feels like it's way in front of this terrarium or whatever it is. And again, kind of look over here, how it all connects. It's confusing. But when we take the edges down, all of a sudden it stands out. We can see that this gun is in front of this. We can see that this guy up here is in front of this guy. There's no question. We can see the distance between this guy and this. Again, if we're taking the edges down enough. Now, these edges might need to be, these could probably be left where they are. Maybe this should be softer to create an even greater drop off between this figure and this one. But if you look at this edge here, it's softened. It's much sharper than this, though it's not sharp. And so this is how we're going to create depth. And so we're going to start by kind of explaining how it works. So this is, if we looked at the image from above, this would be the back of the painting or the back of the scene, the sky. In front of that would be the mountains. In front of that would be the rear figure with the ground it's standing on. And in front of that would be the front figure and with the ground it's standing on. And we're going to manipulate each one of these separately. So we're actually thinking in terms of 4 distinctly different degrees of sharpness in our edges. This one will be a blur. This one will be less of a blur. This one will be even less, and this one will be relatively sharp. So, and we're going to scale it. Let's say if, on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being an absolute blur, maybe we make this 60. We don't want it to be, impossible to understand what we're looking at. So let's say we make it a 60 out of 100. So that's going to be a really soft focus. These mountains might be a 45. So there's a clear difference between these, and the mountains, because they're a bit sharper, sit in front of the sky. They don't feel connected. They feel separated because the edges are different. The mountain at a 45, in order to set that back, this figure with the ground that he's standing on might need to be at a blurred rate of maybe 30%. That's going to put a lot of distance between the mountain and these edges. And then finally, we go from 30 down to maybe 5%. And even the front figure is going to be softened a little bit. So if the edges are razor sharp, this figure, instead of standing here, is going to feel right up against the edge of the canvas. We don't want that. We want the figure set in a little bit. And so we're going to take even his edges down a little. And so you're going to see me do it. So back to our sharp image. We'll get the color later. Back to our sharp image. I'm going to start with the background, the sky. And I'm just going to grab the sky and I'm going to blur it. And you'll have to deal with me working in Photoshop here. But I'm just going to blur it. And I'm going to knock it down. I'm going to push this to there. So you can see, if you look, you can see all of these sharp edges disappear when I put the blur in. The rest of the sky, nothing really changes, but the sharp edges that were in here are now gone. And that sets the sky way back into the distance. From there, I'm now going to move up to the mountain range. The mountain range, when I first do this, it's going to make it just as soft as the sky. But the mountain range, we're going to take it from here, and we're going to push it to about there. And so that's nice and soft. Again, when we start looking at how sharp this is compared to this, look at the amount of depth between this soldier and this mountain range. Again, if I turn it off, there's still some separation. We know there's distance, but these sharp edges bring them closer together. The moment that we blur them, it falls away. And it's obvious here, but look at it back in here. Watch how when this blurs out, how this leg and this pull forward in front of it. So we now have got some nice depth between this frontal platform these guys are standing on and everything way back in the background. The mountain is still recognizable. We didn't blur it out so much that we can't recognize it. So now we move to the ground back in here. So I've got two settings. I've got the ground back in here, and then I've got the ground up here where this front guy is sitting. So I'm going to start with the background in here, and I'm going to blur that out, and we're going to blur that again. We don't want it to be soft like this, like these mountains, or like the sky. We want it to still stay up front. So we're going to blur this maybe about a third of where the other was. So we can see it's soft, softer. You see the difference. And this blur in here helps to separate the gun, right? So again, if we look here, these edges in here and in here are just as sharp as the gun. We take a little bit off of it and it softens. Now the gun feels sharp and feels separated from it. And again, this is just one tool. We're going to be able to apply other things which are going to create a greater sense of separation. Again, we don't want, again, let me rephrase, depending on what you want, you would deal with this accordingly. So here, I could leave this sharp if I want these guys really sharp and the background to feel like it's a million miles away. If I want this to all feel like it's in the same space, that there's just depth, I need to continue the pattern of going from very soft, a little bit sharper, a little bit sharper, and a little bit sharper. I need to slowly, almost like creating a gradient of soft edges to sharp edges from the back of the painting to the foreground. And so now this is softened. The front up here is not. And then I'm also going to do the rear soldier. I'm going to soften him to the same degree that I did the ground back here. So I'm trying to keep them basically at the same level. And you can see there, now he drops off and he feels connected down in here to the space. And now this soldier looks like he's way in front. And again, so look at the two soldiers. Look at how in here and in here, all of these sharp edges just come together. It's hard to tell even if these pieces back in here are part of this soldier or this one. But the moment we blur that, we can now see exactly where this soldier ends and this one begins. And we can feel the distance between them. Now, I haven't gone in and managed the image to account for any of this, right? So some of these places where the gun ends here over this and maybe where this connects, they're really kind of ugly placements that if I were working on a painting, I wouldn't let them sit like that because it makes it harder to get an impression of depth. But this is kind of thrown together. But again, you can hear, look at how soft this is now. We can still make out everything. We can see everything that's going on in here. But look at this leg against this one. So the guy in the background against the guy in the foreground. There is no question that there is distance between them. And so once I've got that, I'm actually going to, I'm just going to soften this guy. The rock's on the ground. This photograph's a little soft already, so I'm going to leave it. But I don't want this guy so razor sharp. He feels like he's pressed up against the surface of the canvas. So I'm going to take him down just a little bit. Right? I don't want him soft like this. I'm going to take him down to maybe like that. So he's still sharp, but he now feels like he's more in the space. And it's just the tiniest little bit, barely perceptible. It's just taking some of the edge off of the contrast. And that's it. So now the guy feels like he's in the space. And that's all that we do with edges. Again, looking back here, I really blurred out the sky. I did about half the amount of blur on the mountains. I did about a third of that much on the rear figure and the ground he's standing on. And then the front figure, well, about 20% of that. So the front figure is still relatively sharp. And that's all I did. And you can see, I mean, this is actually really nice and three-dimensional now. And so this is the beginning. This is just one of the three tools. So, Piper, I want to stop right here and see if we have any questions pertaining to this before I jump into the next thing.
Definitely. I don't see any in the comments yet, but I would just reiterate to everyone who's watching. So we're first talking about edge. So if you didn't know
yes, that. Edge is the only thing I'm working with at this point.
Yeah, we don't have any questions in the chat. So you guys, if we have questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat box. But Kevin, you can go on to the next part.
Okay, good. So from here, I'm actually going to leave the blurred edges. From here, I'm now going to go in and I'm going to start working on value. So the way that value works, it's basically the same. It's the same idea. The sky in the background in this painting, or in this image, is very bright, right? We have this blazing sun back here. And even though this gets darker, this blazing sun tells us this is a well-lit space. And so we're going to keep this the way it is. And we're going to start moving all of these things more in the direction of this light. Okay, and so when we look at the way that it's stacked like this, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, this 1 being white and 10 being black, let's say that this is a 1. It's the brightest light we can possibly have. We don't want to have, this may start out as like a 6, but maybe what we do is we push it and turn it into like a 3 so that its value is much closer to the background, much closer to the sky. Once we've done that, then we'll grab the figure in the background and the ground and play with it to place it in the space. Okay, and so I'm going to start with the sky, and I'm actually going to brighten it a bit. I want to make sure it's nice and bright. And again, you can see when I do this, look at the impact it has on this soldier. Watch how he pulls away from the background. All of a sudden, he's got more distance between him and what's behind him. Even though it's a flat sky, it's not even like a mountain range, it's just a flat sky. But the contrast ratio between him being so dark and the sky being lighter makes the sky look further away, or makes the figure feel close, or, it basically puts distance between this figure and this background. Once I've got that done, I'm now going to move to the mountain range. So I've picked light as my goal for my background. Everything is now, like, as it gets closer to the sky, it's going to become lighter. So with the mountain range, again, I go in and I lighten this. Basically what I've done is I've now changed it. You can see the difference. I went from that to that, and all I did was make it a lot closer to the value of the sky. This is still quite a bit darker than the sky, but it's much closer, and because of it, it now feels further away. Again, you look at it here, how close it feels kind of squeezed up in here. Especially look back in here. When I do this, now look at how this jumps away. Look at how this leg, all of this in here, all of this in here, how it pulls away. Again, just kind of look over those areas. So I've now pushed this back. Now, everything up in here, the two figures and all of this ground up in here have now got a huge distance to the mountain range. And again, I've been able to push the mountain range back by making it look more like the background in value. The background, the sky is extremely light. So I'm making the mountains lighter, making it feel more like they're affected by the background of the sky. Once I've got that, I'm now going to move to the ground back in here. Now, the thing that's going to create distance is not that everything is getting darker as it's moving forward, but it's the contrast between the light and the shadow. Right? This has light and shadow on it, clear shadows, clear lights, right? They're obvious. That's a shadow. That's a light in there. This is all light, right? So we can see that. So what we want to do is we want to create back here very narrow value shifts. So between this value and this value, the brightest thing, 1, and this might be a value 2.5. The lightest thing in here might be 3, and the darkest thing may be a 4. So we want to start getting maybe a 5 and a 2, right? We want to start getting more split between the darkest shade on the object and the lightest shade. Now these lights, they could almost get this bright. So, but what I want to do is I want to make sure that the darks in this subject, this guy back here, and on the ground here are darker than the darks in here. And the lights are kind of in line with everything, that they're a little bit darker than what's in here, so that the lightest thing is furthest away. We get a little bit darker in the shadows. We get a little bit darker in the shadows. We get a little bit darker in the shadows as we move forward. Again, always think of these. If you imagine viewing the image from above like this, imagine a gradient. So when we did the edge work, when we were doing gradients, we did no gradient, and we worked a little gradient, more gradient, even more, and a lot of gradient. Now with value, we've decided, because the sky is so light, we're going to do very light, still quite light, not as light, and then what we think of as like normal lighting. And again, so it's kind of like a gradient as we're doing it.
One quick question here.
Yes.
Kevin. Estella's asking, why are you keeping the sun so bright?
It's because it's an incredible source of light. Like there's nothing else to do with it. If I darken this, it doesn't look like a light like the sun anymore, right? We all know, it doesn't matter what planet you go to, we know what the sun looks like. And we wouldn't believe it if it wasn't a ball of light. So we recognize this. Anybody who's ever been outdoors knows exactly what this is when they see it. Darkening it doesn't really help. Now I could move it off screen, right? So I could take it and I could kind of pull it off screen if I wanted and let the whole background just be this, but that works also. This is still much lighter than this. If I had a nighttime scene, this background would be dark. This would be a little bit lighter. This would be a little bit lighter. This would be a little bit lighter. But since this is light, everything's now getting darker as I'm moving forward. But I've left this here because well, first of all, it works to light these objects. This is strongly lit from this side. So this was all planned. But the sun sitting here, the sun is not really the key. It's the whole sky. But the sun tells us how bright this is. And so I'm using that brightness and I'm building into it. But again, let's say this was nighttime. This would be very dark. This might be a value 10, the sky. This might be a value 9. These might be value 7s. And this might be value 5s, right? Kind of thinking like averages as we move forward. But what the background is in value, let's say it was neutral. If it was neutral, let's say it was a value 5, then this would have a value 6 shadow and a value 4 light. This would have, let's say, again, a value 7 shadow and a value 3 light. So I'm splitting and going in not just one direction away. I'm expanding the contrast ratio. The lights being that much brighter with each step, and the shadows being that much darker with each step as I move away from the background. And I hope that answers the question. So in here, where was I? So here you can see I've added a little contrast here. The shadows and the lights they're not that far apart. When I do this, I get a little bit darker in the shadows and I get a little bit lighter in the lights. Just a little bit. I mean, I can toggle this. I can play with this if I want. I can make the shadows quite a bit darker. If I do that and I make the lights a little bit lighter, the difference between the shadow and the light, the bigger the gap between this value and this value, the stronger it becomes, the more it stands out in front of this. If I make it too much, these start to feel completely separated. They feel detached, which is why I kept it pretty simple. I think I had it at like 15 and then, yeah, so something like that. And again, I want these things to feel like they're in the same space. So if the jump is too broad, if this is a 1 value jump, and then I go 3 values darker in the shadows here and 2 values lighter, these feel disconnected. Everything up here is going to start to feel like a cardboard cutout against the background. So I want to make sure that I'm keeping in line with that gradient from here to here to here to here. So in here, I've got the ground I just did. And now even the rear soldier, I'm going to make a value shift. The soldier was really dark in here, so I'm making a significant shift. I just got to check what this is. Right. And so now, if you look, these darkest shades are quite a bit darker than what's here, but they line up with everything in here. These brightest lights make sense with the sun hitting them. And then these basic shades in here are still a little bit darker. You can see they're a little bit darker than what's in here. A little bit darker, but everything lines up. The space that he's standing on lines up with him. This bright light makes sense with the sun, and all the other values in here, the difference between this light and this shadow are much broader than the difference between the shadows and lights in here, so he pulls forward. And again, you can see we're getting greater and greater distance. Look at how this guy stands out against everything else now. I haven't done anything with him, but this guy really stands out against the rest of this now. And so the front soldier at this point, he's really dark here again, much like the other soldier was. So now what I've done is I've created a much more contrasted figure. He's more brilliantly lit over here. So these lights actually match this shade. These shades in here, his shadows are still very much darker than everything back in here. Kind of line up with what's in here. And again, not much I can do with the image the way I got it. I would make an adjustment to that, and I think I'm actually going to do that because it's going to help kind of make the argument. But you can see that he still really stands out against this, and we're still just dealing in grayscale. When we put color into this, and he doesn't match the color of the background, all of a sudden he's going to just jump away from everything else. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm actually going to use a tool and just make this a little bit lighter because these shadows should really be more like this, not like this. And so I'm just going to go in and I'm going to make an adjustment, just a spot adjustment to it, right? And you'll see, like, as it opens up, as these shadows become more in line with the ones like in here and in here, look at how that gun starts to pull away, right? And so that's a little bit more in line with everything else in that area. So now, again, getting a little bit more separation. So now that we have that, this is now what we're looking at is value shifts and edge shifts. And again, I'm just going to walk through this again. If we viewed this scene from above, the first thing I did was I created, again, think of it like a gradient, blurred here and sharp here. And I created kind of, it gets a little bit sharper and a little bit sharper as we travel forward in the painting. The sky is a blur. The mountain is a half blur. This is a quarter blur. This is left sharp. And again, once that was done, then I went and I looked at my values and I decided the value of the sky should be nice and bright. That would be, so instead of dealing with a mid-tone value, I'm going to try to make a little bit more sense of this. So the way that this works is that whatever the background is, it's not that we're just going to get lighter or darker as we move forward. Whatever the value of the background is, the lights are going to get progressively lighter as we move forward, and the shadows will get progressively darker as we move forward to create greater contrast. The background, the sky, has almost no contrast in it. The mountains have a little bit more contrast because they're way back there. The figure here has quite a bit more contrast than the mountains because it's much closer. And then the figure up front is going to have significant contrast, going from almost white to almost black, where this might be a value 3 gray light and a value 7 gray shadow. And this might be, again, a value, maybe a value 4 light and a value 6 shadow. And this is just value 5 sky. Okay. Again, I hope that that makes sense as I'm explaining it. So the last thing to do is now deal in color. And you can see that just how much depth is in this painting. Now that it's in color and these things start coming apart, they start separating, right? There is an enormous amount of depth here. And again, like even though I made edge decisions and value decisions, if I were doing this for real, like if I were doing it in a painting, I'd be making these adjustments in color at the time I was doing them. So when you do this in a painting, you make all your value and color decisions on your palette. So you can set up your palette. Again, if you think about your palette and set it up like this and say, okay, these are going to be my colors for my sky. These will be my colors for my mountain. These will be my colors for this figure and the ground. And that'll be the same here for this figure. And so you start thinking like, this can only be value 5. Doesn't matter what colors I mix. It has to only be value 5. This, when I mix them, they're going to be values 4 and 6. And that's going to give me a little bit more contrast than this. But when I mix these, I am going to make sure they stay in that value range. And you can do that. You just get a strip of grayscale. You can pull them off the internet if you want. And just drop it down. Take little snapshots with your phone in black and white, and you can see if you're matching a value 4 and a value 6. This one, again, would be a 3 maybe and a 7. Value 3 lights and value 7 shadows. And so when you're mixing all your colors at this point, like on this part of your palette, you know where they're going, so they must fall into that certain value range. And then the front figure would be even brighter and darker in the lights and shadows respectively. But this is how you would set up your palette to control that. So now that we're here, what we want to do is we now want to start moving everything the same way we did in making a gradient from the background to the foreground in value. We also want to do that in color, right? And so let's just stick with this color, right? It's kind of like tan. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave that alone. And I'm now going to address the mountain. The mountain right now is a completely separate color. If I want to make it look closer to the background, what I can do is I can change the color. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to put a little bit more tan in it, just like that. Right. So I'm toggling my hue and my saturation, right? So, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to move this until I get a color that's a bit more like the background. And the more it looks like the background, the more it falls away. Right, again, watch it over here. The more that I bring it to the color of the background, the more it disappears into the background. Greater distance. So I'm going to leave it like that. I don't want this to look like the background, but not look like this. I need this and this to still feel connected. So I'm just going to play this until I feel like I've still got this connection, but like these lighter shades in here start to feel more like that. And so I'm feeling pretty good about that. And again, not a major difference. Doesn't have to be. If this background were red, this thing would become pretty red. But this is really neutral. This is not it's not a dynamic color, right? So if we test it, right? If we test the sky, we'll get an idea. It's a really neutral color. It's like kind of in here. This is where your really rich colors, and these are grays. It's sitting right in here where we're hitting these grays. And so this isn't going to be, the mountains aren't going to become very colorful because of this. But if this were a rich, dynamic color, like fire engine red, this would be red. And color everything in the painting would be red in order to account for the color of the light being shined on everything. So anyway, so now we've got this adjusted for color. We're now going to deal with the ground. So again, I already know if I just move this a little bit in this direction, I get a little bit more, it starts leaning towards that warmth. And so I don't want to go so far. I'm not looking to do too much. And in fact, actually, like this direction I'm finding is actually going too green. I'm going to go in the other direction. Just again, and I'm kind of doing this on the fly. I'm not sure exactly what I'm looking for. So I think that's good. It kind of comes in line. It's different from this. It's different from this a little bit, but it's okay. Again, it's all being lit by this color. This thing is so kind of dropped off now that it's fine. And in fact, I might even go back and kind of play with this. Let me take a look at that. So I like the ground the way it is, and you can see this is a little bit less affected than this. And I'm going to leave it that way. I'm going to go back to the mountain real quick and see if I can see what I can do if I really kind of push that. Yeah, see, as I'm doing it, I'm starting to get some greens in here, which they're not really back in here. But again, I'm just a little bit more, and again, it starts to fall away. And I'm going to do that. I'm actually going to do that like that. I'm going to leave it there. So that's a bit more than I had before. So that's looking good. And now I've got this is a little bit more red. Now this guy, he's green. He needs to be colored so that he fits in the space a little bit better. So here we'll get this. And so this, he probably needs some red in him. So that's going to go green. So here, if I start going in this direction, he starts picking up some of these reds and some of the kind of peachy colors up in here. And he starts feeling more like he belongs in this space. If I go too far, it becomes red. I want to keep him green, but I want him to feel like he's colored by the environment. If he doesn't feel colored by the environment, he's not gonna fall back. Like if you look down here at his legs now, they're almost the same color as this. They're kind of falling into these peachy colors up here. He's now feeling deeper and deeper into the space. And I don't know if you remember when we first started, even though he was set back visually in space, like perspective-wise, he was hard to separate from the figure up front. And now look at how far away he is. So I would leave him just like that. And again, all I'm doing is I'm incorporating some of this color, which is further away than this, and some of this. I'm kind of finding a middle ground in there to marry him to the plane that he's on. Last but not least, I've got the figure up front. And again, even for the figure up front, he can't be left green like this. He has to be colored a little bit like he's in the space. Again, otherwise, he just looks like he's cut out and stuck on the page, right? And so if I color him a little bit like the background, these colors, they now kind of fall in line, right? And that's a pretty significant difference. But he feels like he's in the space. He feels like he's being lit by that sun, and these ambient lights fall in line with these colors. And that connects him to the space. The same way that I did that very, very soft blur on him, like 0.5, tiny little bit to push him back a foot away from the edge of the surface of the canvas. This helps to push him back a little bit more and connect him to the painting. Anyway, this is how all three of those tools are used. I mean, it's a very simple concept, but it requires a lot of playing around with in order to make it work. This is the original file, untouched.
Wow.
Right, so let me just...
That difference is crazy.
Right, so again, that's the original. and this is where we went. And look at the depth. Like, watch how these things track back into space. And again, look at how sharp all of this is. And again, I could have left everything in color. I've made the changes really kind of to accentuate how far you can push these things. If I were painting, I probably wouldn't be subduing the colors like this. I keep everything nice and rich. But from the standpoint of trying to match things up, or trying to make sense of it in its simplest way, having all of this color can be very confusing. If I were so let's say that this were the painting I were trying to do. Obviously, now that we've kind of talked about this, you can see this is way too green for this environment. He cannot possibly stay this green, right? So what I would do is, so this orange, I would stay right the way it is. This thing would then be made much more like this. In fact, I kind of hate to do this, but I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to erase everything I just did. I'm just going to play with this image just for a minute, just to show you another take on it. I'm not going to have any blurred edges. I'm just going to play with the color. So I'm going to leave the sky exactly the way it is. Now the mountains, I want to get the mountains more in line with these oranges, right? And so it's a matter of finding the color. In fact, I think I'm not going to do this one. I think I'm actually going to do I'm not a Photoshop person. I get by, but I'm not a Photoshop person. So here I'm just going to, I'm going to change the color, see if I can get a little bit more, make it a little bit more like the sky. And as I do this, it falls away. Again, like, I'm not doing anything with edges. All I'm doing here is adjusting the color, right? And so making it feel more like the background. So I'm actually going to take the edges down, and you'll see again, it's just going to fall away into the distance. Now it feels connected. It feels like part of that world. It feels illuminated by this sky. And again, even in here, I would adjust my levels, right? It's too dark. The darkness of it pulls it away from the sky. So if I make it lighter, it falls further and further away. The lighter I get it, the further away it goes. Look at how far away it feels in here between them, right? So there, that now I've got that, I've pushed that back. I'm now going to move up to the ground in here. And I'm basically just going to kind of work through this. So this isn't colorful enough. I need to move it in the direction of this. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come in, I'm going to make an adjustment to the colors. I'm going to add more of this orange into this. And again, you can see it already. It's a little bit, I want to get a little bit more warmth in it, a little bit more yellow. And I'll let it be a little bit different. I want it to be nice and colorful as it comes forward. Again, I want richer as it gets closer. So this is nice and rich. It's still in line with this color, but it's a little bit richer. And again, I'm just kind of playing with it to see how it goes. So there we go, nice and red. And you can see, look at the separation between the gun and this. So that's good. I'm now going to blur the edges on this. So again, separation a little bit. This is now out of focus against this, which is nice. In fact, I'm going to push this a little bit more. Make it 3.5. So I'm actually making this quite a bit softer against this gun. You can see the gun jumping away from it now. So I'm going to do the same with the soldier now. The rear soldier's got to be colored as well. So color balance on the soldier. He can't be green in this space. He doesn't fit. So in order to set him back and make him feel like he's standing in this environment, I've got to change his colors. Got to bring him closer to what's in the background. And so, and again, he doesn't have to be a perfect match, but he's got to be close. He's got to look like he's colored by this sky. And again, we know he's this green. He's not going to be orange because he's wearing a green suit. The green suit is only going to bounce. I mean, even if the light is orange, there's going to be some spectrum in here in that light source of green. So you're going to get some sense of it, even if it's really grayed out. But look at how this looks. It's barely even green compared to this, but he fits in the space. I'm now going to set him back by blurring him a little bit. I'm not going to blur him quite as much. I mean, though, look at how nice that is. He looks like he's like perfect in that space. I'm going to leave that. That's good. Look at how this guy now pulls away. Now, I don't want him. He's just, like I said, just pressed up against the glass here. I don't want him there. So even this guy is going to get worked. He's going to get pushed back. So we'll do an adjustment here for our color balance. We're not going to add quite as much. He doesn't have to be red like this, because as he gets closer to us, he becomes further removed from the environment. At least that's how it feels. It's an illusion that we create, right? And so here, he's no longer like ridiculous, like forest green. He's now in green, colored like the environment around him. I didn't even really need to do much in order to do that, right? The more he becomes colored like the environment, the more he fits into it, the less he pulls forward, right? So kind of liking him a little bit less connected. Like, this is good. I want him to feel like he's dressed in green. This guy, look at this guy. He doesn't even feel green anymore. This here is like almost this color. So this is good. He's nice and green. And now again, I'm going to just take the edge off of him. Right. And again, I don't want to go crazy, just a little bit. So he's softened. It's not much, but it helps to set him back. I haven't done anything with values here, just color and edge. You look at how powerful this is. I mean, right? I mean, look at this. Look at the depth, the feeling of environment. I mean, this is atmosphere. And again, I haven't adjusted values. If I went in and I adjusted values, that would help also. Like, I could leave these alone, or maybe open this up. In fact, let's do it, right? I'm going to leave the sky the way it is. I'm going to adjust value here. So I'm going to make the mountain a little bit lighter. Not too crazy, just a little bit lighter, right? So not a big jump, just a little bit. This here, I'm actually going to I think I'm going to darken him just a little bit so he separates from this, right? So these lights in here really jump away from the background, but the darks don't. There's a bigger jump between the light and the mountain and the shadow on the guy in the mountain. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to basically make an adjustment to that. Again, so here, so this in Photoshop, this deals in darkening shadows. I don't know if I want to do it that way. Maybe just like that. Just a little bit. I mean, look at the difference. Minor. But that little bit of darkness separates him further from the background. I'll do the same with the ground that he's standing on. Right? Very, very subtle shift. Just to make him feel connected. And again, the contrast up here, this is nice and bright against really dark. I can leave that alone. And then I'll just play with the guy up front. Again, for the most part, he's probably fine. But again, a little bit of contrast, a little bit more contrast in him so that his lights really sing even against these. And I think, and that'll give us a really nice look. So here, I want to pump up those lights. You can see them really kind of cranked, really bright. This and this, you can tell this is much brighter than this, right? So my brightest light in here is this. My brightest light in this level is here, and at this level, this. Look at the difference between this shade, and then this shade to this shade. Also, look at my darkest shades. Darkest shade here. Let's say darkest shade here, darkest shade in here. These are big jumps. This is a very big jump, but this is still from here to here is significant. So, and again, I can even just kind of sink in some of those darks. So again, I've created brighter lights and darker shadows. So the contrast ratio on him is much greater than on him, which is much greater than this. And again, now I'm back to having a really strong three-dimensional image. Let's go back to the original. It's a nice amount of depth. Look at how much distance there is between this gun and the thing behind it. See if I can zoom in here. Look at how that looks. I mean, that's an incredible amount of depth between this gun and this back in here. And that's what we're looking for. Anyway.
We have a couple of questions, and
okay.
a couple of them kind of go about process. So let me see if I can share these questions. Nicholas asks, in a painting, do you normally plan all of this out in advance, because there's a lot of moving parts going on here, or would you make adjustments to the different contrasts as you paint?
Okay. When you've been doing it as long as I have, you can wing these things a little bit, but you really do have to have a plan. Like, even for me, I've been at this forever. If I don't think it through, I find myself somewhere in the middle of the painting with the value color decisions not making sense, not doing what I want. And so you do have to be very thoughtful about where you're going with the painting right from the beginning. The more you plan, the easier the painting becomes. Right? I mean, you think about it, it's not any different than getting in your car and driving somewhere. It's one thing to know where you're going. It's another thing to have a plan on how you're going to get there. Right? You know what roads you're going to take, and you know that if there's an accident on this road, you can take this other road. Right? You have a plan. That plan makes the ride easy. And it's obviously it's different now with GPS, but I imagine almost everyone in the room here has probably lived in a world before GPS when we used maps. And if you got halfway to someplace and you didn't really know what was going on, you didn't have a greater sense of where you were going and how you were getting there, and you ran into a problem like an accident or closed road, like, you'd be in trouble. You'd have to spend some time figuring out where you were and how to get out of where you were. If you plan the painting out well from the beginning, you find very little, detour, we'll take a left over here, we'll drive 3 miles up the road, we'll get back on it right, and we're good to go. Always plan this stuff out. When at some point you'll realize that you don't have to be so crazy about planning it out. But look, if you just set up your palette and think in terms of viewing the painting from above, like it's a diorama, viewing it from above and saying, like, my background has got to be within this range. And that's, so you know your values, but your colors can be whatever they want. Then you have the next tier forward, and you know what your contrast between your lights and your shadows have to be. So you make that split, mix your shadows here, mix your lights here in that row. And as long as you keep doing that, the painting will keep getting more dynamic as it moves forward. I mean, I'm looking at the image nice and small on my screen right now. It's really powerful. It's got so much depth to it. And that's, again, just these 3 moving parts. And so, but like I said, planning is everything. Don't wing this stuff.
Okay, awesome. So I think we have a couple more, and I believe that this, Jacqueline asks this one, it's also about kind of process in the actual painting realm of things. So when you're creating an image of this size, whether in planning or in actually painting, are you starting with your darker values, or do you prefer to start with your lighter values? Where do you kind of, or what's the difference, I would add to this, what's the difference between picking your light and kind of working towards your shadows versus picking your darker shadows and working towards your lights?
Okay, so this is actually very simple. You learn it in Evolve. Shadows always come first. Always. Forever. Till the end of time. That's never going to change. And the reason that we do that is, if you do darker shades first and work towards your lights, the lighter value that is your canvas, untouched, will always be lighter than the paints you're putting down. If you put your lights down first, the white of the canvas is now holding the place of darker shadows, and it becomes very confusing. So we always put our darker shades down first and work to our lights. If we have shadows and lights, like in one of the soldiers here, we would do the shadows, then the lights. In the sky, we don't have shadows, so we would go from dark to light, but always working from darkest to lightest. Shadows to lights first, if they're there, but if not, light to lighter. So that's the first part of it. The second part is, in a painting like this, and you'll be doing this when you get to block 4, always paint what is furthest away first, and then work your way forward. So if I did this painting, I'd paint the sky and the mountains Then I would paint the ground underneath their feet from where the rear soldier is all the way to the front. Then I would place the soldier in the background. Then I'd place the soldier up front. That's how I would paint this. And the reason is the sky is 20% of the real estate of the painting. It's very simple and it's very easy to get right if I just take a couple of moments and a little bit of care to color match, perfectly color match that sky. Once it's in, it then informs me about what the mountains look like. If I put a mark down with a mountain, it's too dark, it's going to be screaming at me. So then I use the sky to tell me what the mountains are supposed to look like. Of course, I'm color matching the mountains too. But if I'm even a little bit off, I'll be able to see it because this nice flat sky is sitting behind it. Again, once you start getting into turns and form and gradients, it's hard to tell, but a flat sky, very simple. So then I would do the mountains, which are relatively flat as well because of how far away they are. The variations between dark and light, color shifts and all that are all very subtle. So I can manage that. Now I'm talking about like maybe 30, 35% of the entire canvas is covered. If I put the ground in next, and again, I don't start at the front and work my way back, I start at the base of the mountains and kind of pull forward, I can see how they connect to the mountains, and I can establish, again, getting myself to maybe where 55, 60% of the entire canvas is covered. Now when I start getting into the soldiers, it's easy to see if something's out of place. If I put something down and it's too dark, it's going to be impossible to miss if I'm looking. And so for me, build the environment, but always from the background forward.
Awesome. I'm going to ask one more question before we kind of start to wind down.
Actually, I just want to say one more thing with that. Sure. So with the image, remember at the end, I made even the soldiers very orange. Imagine if you started with a soldier, you know the soldier's green, but in that environment, he's got to feel less green because of the environment. If you painted him, he'd look kind of weird on a white canvas. The colors wouldn't look right and you'd be second guessing yourself. But once the environment is in, then when you put the soldier in, the colors will make sense. And I can tell you, I've done portraits where I've had a client where they were in a purple space and their flesh tones looked gray. I mean, really kind of sickly gray, even little bits of green in them. And if not for the environment already being in place for the skin to make sense against, I would never have believed that what I was mixing on my palette would have been an acceptable flesh tone. Great example of that is teeth. Teeth, when you paint teeth, on your palette, it's going to look like kind of greenish, grayish sewage. That's the color of teeth in a mouth, unless, of course, they're like bleached white. But in normal people, that's the color because there's not a lot of light hitting them. But again, relative to white, there's a lot of color in there. And it's not a value 1, it's like a value 4. And the colors are kind of grayish blues or grayish greens. But if you just painted teeth first and not the surrounding environment, the teeth would look ridiculous to you. And you would be second guessing yourself and changing them, even if they were perfect the first pass out, because the environment is really what defines it.
Awesome. Okay, so I actually have 2 great questions that I want to ask you. The first one is, how do you know how soft to make something? So if you look at the soldier, right, if we look at this second soldier, right, how do you know how soft to make him?
Well, again, as I'm working, I have a plan. And I know that I want him to be set back a certain amount. So I would paint him. And as I'm working, I would kind of knock the edges down. I'd play with the values to see if I can set them back. Again, the environment is easier to do that with because it's less detailed. It's less specific. There aren't all these linear marks. So I use the environment to kind of set the space. But again, it doesn't have to be it's not formulaic. I could take those edges down just a tiny little bit and the figure's still going to fall away. It's as long as that figure is softer than the figure up front, the space is going to be created. And as I'm working, the more space I want, the softer I make it. If I want that guy to look 100 feet away, I blur him out the way I did the background, the mountains. I change his colors to fit more like the backgrounds. Or instead of doing that, I leave him relatively sharp not as sharp as the guy up front, and I use more color and value to push them back into the space. But look, this is trial and error, and it's why I said, don't try to do all three at once. Learn how to use edges so that when you want to put a person back 20 feet in the painting, you're not clueless, that you know exactly how far you have to push the edge to get them there. And don't start with a person, start with a can and a ball and a cube. Start with simple subjects. If you can't make 3 objects look like one is 20 feet away and one is 10 feet away and one's right up front, then you can't do it with complex subject matter either. And if you can do it with the simple stuff, you can do it with the complex. Now, again, I imagine everybody here seen, there's a 15-minute video that really goes into how value and edge build this illusion in an incredible way. If you have not seen it, definitely go and check it out. Like I said, it's a 15-minute video, and it's a very simple subject. It's a couple of balls, but it shows in incredible detail exactly how to manipulate edge alone in order to create depth. And I take it much, much further than this.
Okay, last question for you. And this is from one of our Evolve students, Peggy, and she asks, what is the importance of a halo in the illusion of depth? And I believe she's speaking about when you kind of get that glow around certain objects. How does that play into depth?
It really doesn't. Oh, it's funny. I mean, it really doesn't. Like, so if we're talking about like lens flare or something like that, it's just style. You don't see that in paintings very often. That's a digital thing. When like for illustrators, they may build that in even to a painting. Because it's an effect of light. It's not something we created digitally and we like the way it looks. It's actually an effect of light. But a glow around the outside of something, all that is an eminence of light kind of bouncing off of the subject. It really doesn't have anything to do with the illusion of depth. The illusion of depth is wrapped completely in just a very clean use of edges. Sharp against soft, sharp pull forward, graded fall away. The sharper something is, the more it pulls forward. The softer it is, the more it falls away. And again, it's not just how soft something is, but how soft it is compared to how sharp something else is. And so, and again, you use that, then it's color. The closer something's color is to the color of the environment, meaning the sky, the further away it looks. Anybody who's ever looked at a mountain range miles off in the distance knows you barely see the mountain. You see a little bit of like the white at the very top or light hitting it. And then this shadowed side of it disappears into the color of the sky. The closer things get, the more information you can see. And again, that's basically what it is. The further away something is, the less information, meaning less contrast, less color, less edge. The closer it gets, the more you can make out its colors, its values, and its edges, and they expand. The range of each is expanded at that, as you move forward.
Awesome. Well, I think that's kind of the end of our discussion today, unless Kevin, you had anything else to add about this idea of depth.
No, I mean, it always comes down to the same thing. Keep it simple, right? This is a nice kind of warm up to how it all works, but don't bite off more than you can chew if you're going to play with it. And that's not even putting in drop shadows or anything else. Once you start adding in all of that, and that's actually where proportional drawing or perception comes in, perspective. And once you start adding perspective and drop shadows, and all of these other effects become magnified, right? And it's, again, we didn't get into any of that stuff because we're just looking at value, color, and edge. But again, we always talk about perception as part of that. That's your ability to see how things recede into space. It's perspective, it's proportional drawing. And so this is really just about value, color, and edge, because as tools, they're so simple and they're so powerful if they're under your command. And so rather than getting bogged down in mathematical formulas for perspective and all these other things, manage those 3 moving parts and you'll be able to do some absolutely incredible stuff. And you'll be able to do it easily. That's the key. It becomes almost free of labor once you understand how it works.
Definitely. And I just want to reiterate, keep it simple, guys. We've showed you some kind of an advanced image, but it's simple kind of principles. But you can do this with your own work. You can keep it really simple, just considering value, edge, and color. And if you're in the Evolve program, we're teaching you this and you're practicing this with every painting. So if you have any questions, you can always add them to this video later on and we'll get back to you and answer them. But thanks for joining us tonight. And Kevin, thank you for coming on and giving your time and kind of going through these principles with everybody.
Sure, it was my pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for coming out.
All right, everyone, have a great night.
And there you have it. Hopefully the slides I shared were helpful along the way. This is not a one-size-fits-all formula, but it is a proven methodology that can be applied to create depth in any artwork. Just these 3 things. Isn't that crazy? Simple, but powerful. Very curious to hear all your comments about this. Now, after Kevin finished this live recording, he couldn't help himself, and he added a 3rd soldier just to show you how you can continue to stack these effects and even squeeze one thing in between another as long as you know what your relationships should be in order to place it in its proper space. And this doesn't have to be applied to just landscape paintings. You could apply this to still lifes, or even if I'm going to just put my hand behind my head, I could use values, edges, or color to give it a little bit of distance from my nose to my hand or my ear back in here. This happens in portraiture, and you want to be conscious of the depth that's happening, right? My face isn't flat. There's a few inches between my nose and my ear. So this can actually be applied on these smaller scale levels, and when they are, they become so dynamic and powerful. It's amazing. It's awesome. Kevin made this look easy, but don't be tempted to go out and try all of this all at once. We don't want to set you up for failure. We want to set you up for success. So start off with a still life and put one object behind another, just slightly, and then see if you can separate them from each other using only edges. And then try only values. And then maybe grab another still life and make it a little bit more complex, and then go back to edges, and so on and so forth. And if you're serious about leveling up this skill, come join us at the Evolve program. This is what we're all about. If you want more content like this, let me know by liking this video, and if you want to be notified the next time we publish a new video, then you can subscribe to our channel. Last but not least, you can find the link to Kevin's 15-minute video on depth that he highly recommended in the description of this video. So go enjoy that, and I wish you all happy painting.